Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Analytical Innovations to Improve Real-Time Program Design session. My name is Sara Giannozzi. I'm a social protection specialist at the World Bank, and I'm honored to be moderating this session today. Some very interesting presentations lined up, and really looking forward to the discussion. Before I present our speakers and start off the conversation this morning for you, let me remind us all about a few housekeeping rules. First, as you know, probably by now, interpretation is available into English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. Please click on the globe on the bottom of the screen and select a language there. Everyone must choose a language, even if it's English, so please do that. Secondly, as you may know, we will be asking you questions. We're going to try to make this participatory, and we will be using menti.com, which is an audience interaction tool throughout this session. Either on your phone, your tablet, or in a new browser window, please log in to www.menti.com and use this code that you are seeing on the screen right now, 82711398. If you do that, you'll be able to respond to the questions, and we'll get to get your views on a few issues that are coming up. And finally, I just wanted to encourage you all to please do use the chat box to ask questions, share your experience, and participate, really engage in the conversation. We will be selecting a few of those questions for a Q&A session in the end. And so we'll do our best to sort of summarize some of the questions you have there. Okay, this is really the third day of what has been a very engaging conference for me. I found it really interesting. I really enjoyed hearing the different experiences and lessons, ideas, and of course, many challenges, right? And I hope you're also feeling inspired and not overwhelmed by all of this. Today, joining us, we have three researchers and practitioners who have a wealth of experience in really translating monitoring and evaluation results into stronger program design and implementation. And we're going to hear from them, and then we're going to ask some very difficult questions and try to unpack really what it takes to use this information that comes from monitoring and from evaluation to make these programs stronger, and to do this in innovative ways and in real time. And maybe this will help answer some of the questions that all of us have come up with over the last few days. So first, Kelsey Wright. Kelsey is a World Bank consultant and previously IPA program manager with IPA. She has led multiple impact evaluations, especially in the Africa region. Second, let me introduce Shagun Sabarwal, who is the Director of Policy, Training and Communications at JPAL South Asia and Director of CLEAR South Asia. Shagun works with state governments in India, directly scaling up evidence-based programs, and is a technical and knowledge partner for building monitoring and evaluation systems that can ensure that there's quality also at scale, something that we know is very challenging. And then finally, and last but not least, Andrew Sheperd is Principal Research Fellow for Equity and Social Policy and Director of the Chronic Poverty Advisory Network at ODI. Andrew focuses on understanding poverty dynamics and really drawing out policy and programming implications for reducing extreme poverty. And he'll talk to us especially of his experience during COVID, which I think is quite relevant tonight. So Kelsey, Shagun, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really look forward to your presentations. But before we go into that, I would like to ask you for a little bit of patience and to allow me to a couple of minutes to frame this session. I promise it won't be more than 2 slides. Can you see my screen? Yes. Great. So first, why is this session so important? Why did the organizer want to have this session in the program? And why did we really try to find the right people to participate? We've seen over the last couple of days, really, we've talked a lot about the surge in economic inclusion programming that's happened globally. And that's fueled really by a scale up on that governments are leading, building on social protection, livelihood, jobs, financial inclusion interventions, different entry points, but essentially a really large increase in surge in these kind of programs. And this scale up has really been possible thanks to the compelling evidence that has come from very solid and high quality impact evaluations that have happened over the past 15 years, and that started with the CGAP and Ford Foundation graduation pilots. Right? So we've learned a lot from these experiences, and over time, really, we've built enough knowledge to motivate and launch this what's now a surge, right? At the same time, right now, during this expansion, governments are raising very critical how-to questions, and really how to do these programs at scale in what are very rapidly evolving contexts. We see increasing shocks, fragility contexts, higher urbanization, informality, aging, all these mega trends that are shaping and are making things very variable on the ground, and changes happen quickly. And we need to find, it's really important that we find ways to continue to provide the solid evidence that has underpinned programs and the development of economic inclusion programs as we have these experiences at a larger scale. And we really learn from them in real time. And really learning from them in real time is important and challenging, part of the motivation for this session. So this session will look at what are some quick diagnostic assessments that can inform program design and also contribute to jumpstart dialogue with stakeholders when sometimes this might be a challenge, and sort of generate the political will and capital to really scale these programs and continue. We'll discuss how we can embed research findings into program design and implementation, and how we can promote a comprehensive approach to monitoring and evaluation. So something that looks at both sides of the monitoring on an ongoing basis, but also evaluating learning in order to improve programs. How do we strengthen this monitoring and evaluation capacity within programs themselves, and create that capacity on the ground to continue to do this over time? And finally, what are some innovative approaches that can help us learn from this implementation in real time and inform program changes? We hope that the ideas and the experiences shared today will really demonstrate how these analytical innovations can help real-time learning and inform program design. And to sort of close this third day, or at least this part of the program, on a positive note and some good, strong ideas on how to make things better. Having said that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Kelsey, who will talk to us about her experience in the Sahel. We've heard a lot about the Sahel program, and I think we're really looking forward to your presentation tonight. Thank you very much, Kelsey.
Good morning, everyone. It's just going to take me a second to...
Actually, Kelsey, sorry, as I just realized that I forgot to actually ask the first question. So as you find your presentation,
thank you.
Can I please ask the organizers to show our first Menti poll? And I apologize for this confusion. I was so eager to hear the presentation.
Sure. Go ahead.
So the first question is, please rate the following statements from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The first one is, diagnostic studies can improve program design and delivery. The second is, quick diagnostic efforts can be pivotal in shifting dialogue and political support. And the third question or statement is, it is challenging to course correct once the program is in the implementation phase. And I see that people are engaging despite my initial mix-up, so that's great. Everybody agrees that diagnostics are important to improve design, and there's a little less agreement around the fact that it's challenging to course correct, which makes me feel hopeful. We're all very eager to hear how to do that. Anybody else? I see 8 people have responded. I'll give another minute. 10, pretty much consistent. So everybody agrees we should have the diagnostic studies. A little less agreement on how effective they are in shifting political support. That'll be interesting to unpack and hear from our speakers. And I would say moderate agreement on whether it's hard to course correct once program is started. So everybody thinks it's, or most people seem to think it's possible to course correct, which is encouraging. So thank you very much. And Kelsey, yes, now off to you.
Great, thanks for that. I guess I won't need to do much convincing of you on the role of diagnostics in program design. So I work on the Sahel Adaptive Social Protection Program, and in particular, I work on the RCT of productive inclusion measures. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about the diagnostic phase that started at least in 2016, if not before that, on how that program was designed in conjunction with governments in the Sahel. So the general basis was that existing cash transfer systems can be augmented in ways that we've seen with these multifaceted productive programs, a la the graduation approach. And the idea is that an additional program could be built on, our package of measures could be built on top of existing cash transfer programs to produce resilience and productivity of the poor. Except in 2016, we didn't quite know exactly what that package of interventions would be. So colleagues at Innovations for Poverty Action, the World Bank, and outside institutions, as well as government representatives, started a diagnostic study and a design phase. And I'm going to talk about this diagnostic study, which was a qualitative study and a constraints assessment survey that would really provide a voice for the beneficiaries or the potential beneficiaries in their program design. And then we could take that evidence from the beneficiaries when we were talking to additional stakeholders, including the researchers, but also governments and the World Bank, when we were designing the package of interventions. So the first part was we did a qualitative constraints assessment. This was led by Estelle Koussoubé in 6 countries across the Sahel. And 4 communities were chosen in each country, and there was a qualitative research done in each of the 4 communities. It was based on focus groups, discussion, and key informant interviews, with a really nice, strong interview package that was done, structured interviews in each of the communities, including like a constraint ranking matrix, and it encouraged both women and men to speak, as well as people that had not as much social capital in the community. The topics include livelihoods, perceptions and aspirations, challenges to raising their own productivity, and strategies to overcome their own constraints. And really the evidence from this qualitative work suggested, much like we see in other settings, that there were multiple constraints and that people were using suboptimal strategies to overcome them, including like potentially selling a cow or other productive assets in the face of shocks. So to complement that qualitative work, we did a quantitative constraints assessment that was led by Innovations for Poverty Action. And this was to look at actual potential beneficiaries and to do more structured household surveys with them. And so in the quantitative side, we really focused on having a strong sampling methodology so that we could really highlight, that I'd be happy to talk to anyone about. So we could really highlight quantitatively the differences in constraints identified by men versus women, by richer versus poorer households, and by households that were closer or farther away from market. And the types of questions that we asked were not those that were typical of a national survey, because otherwise we would just use the national survey. So we have like a battery of very interesting questions in terms of ranking activities in terms of risky and most risky. People directly and indirectly identified their constraints to productivity. And then we got people's opinion on their potential interventions. So based on that qualitative work that provides a lot of color and the quantitative work that provides a lot of numbers that we can easily show to stakeholders that this is the voice of the beneficiary, as well as conversations with additional stakeholders, we identified skills, capital, markets, empowerment, and social dynamics as specific constraints that needed to be addressed in the Sahelian context, in particular the communities where the productive accompanying measures would be implemented. Based on that, I bet you have seen this week the full package of interventions in the Sahel presented by one of my colleagues, but what I'd like to highlight is based on the constraints analysis. These two components were the community sensitization on aspiration and social norms, and the life skills training, which are a little bit different, as well as the access market, which are a little different than the standard package. So the RCT evaluates the full package and a combination of some of these. But beyond RCTs, this quick diagnostic phase where we looked at constraints can be done really cheaply, and it can provide context and as well as a voice for beneficiaries at the table when you're discussing program design with stakeholders, as well as results from these questions. If you have a stakeholder that says, you know, I really believe this, you can just like ask beneficiaries directly those questions. And the hard numbers are harder to argue with at the table. Results from the program are promising. It shows that the program is cost effective in Niger, and results from the rest of the countries will be available hopefully within a year or so. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. I really like the sequencing of the qualitative and quantitative, but I will push you a little bit more on how this relates with how you used it with stakeholders and how you help use the actual tools to find consensus. But for the moment, we'll go from the Sahel to India and Shagun. Sara, please.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. And I've already started learning a lot. So I'm really excited to be here. And so what I'll do is I'll quickly share my screen and then talk to you about this work that we are doing in India. There's a bit of an echo. So, yeah. Okay, so basically, you know, I wanted to talk about the work that we are doing in Bihar, where we are scaling up the graduation approach. And this is a program that is now being implemented by the government. So the presentation that I'm going to be making today is basically going to focus on how do we move, you know, from this point where we have some really great rigorous evidence that can really help solve a problem that's continued to persist and is also very complex in nature, which is that of ultra poverty in a country like India, which has had, you know, a lot of economic growth. And how do we then ensure that the government is able to implement this program in a way that it really, really transforms the lives of these people on the ground? And what is the role that data evaluation can really play in this entire process? So I'll kind of begin a little bit with the context setting. And those of you who may not be, you know, knowing Bihar very well, it's a large state in India, but it's also very well known for the fact that despite a lot of economic growth that's happened in India, the state of Bihar continues to perform quite poorly on some very key human development indicators, even when compared to the national average. And this state has been the focus of attention of many different types of organizations. Even the central government and also the state government themselves have tried many different efforts. And things have, of course, improved a lot, but yet one of the big problems for them is that there is still a substantial problem or a substantial proportion of ultra poor households that continue to live in this state. So basis that, we decided to begin working with the government of Bihar. And for us, you know, our story in many ways began once the science paper was out, and when we knew the 6-country study had shown that not only was this graduation approach effective, it was also, it could also be implemented in different contexts by many different NGOs. So it was, in a way, the results were generalizable. Second, we also know that the results were sustainable. But then the question was that how do we move from this NGO incubated model, which of course has been implemented at scale in many different countries as well. How do we go from here to moving towards a government implemented model where the governments themselves do have, especially in low and middle income countries, do have challenges such as low administrative capacity, a lot of last mile implementation problems. So when we began doing this work, for us, it's not just that you have this great evidence and everything just goes great from there. The first thing that we were confronted with many times was that the government acknowledged that yes, this is a problem for us, but while your program may have worked in another state in India and in these different countries, we don't really know whether it will work in my state, in the state of Bihar. So a lot of our work began with these demonstration pilots, which was implemented by our NGO partner in India, who has been implementing this program, Bandhan Konagar. And when they started implementing this, we made sure that there were a lot of office visits. We were collecting good data. We were able to share with the government, and the government was able to see that yes, a change is happening. And then, of course, the government did realize that yes, it is important to incorporate this program and make it a part of the social protection system that exists, the formal social protection system, and which is why the scheme was launched. And since then, there are 3 partners that are working together with the government. Now here, I feel that the importance of data and to especially course correct and make decisions so that the quality at scale is ensured, especially when you're looking at a really sort of a very complex system, which goes all the way from the high level, which is this big state team, to districts team, to village teams, to like local level. And as a knowledge and learning partner for this particular initiative, we have been deploying a lot of these analytics and also collecting a lot of data at every point in time. And one of the big things, for example, that I'm going to take a slice of is this work that we've been doing when you're looking at the staff capacity, because a lot of the biggest central issue is how do we have high quality staff that can implement this complex program, undertake good mentoring and coaching, do micro planning, ensure that the beneficiaries are with them throughout this process. And how do you do it when the scale is so large and when the government systems you cannot equate them with the NGO systems. So this is what we have been doing throughout. We've been collecting a lot of these different types of data. We have been having these different sort of governance structures where we are able to share this data in the real-time basis. And as a result of this, the government has taken a lot of decisions that have helped them ensure that the quality is maintaining. And finally, I would like to just give this last slide to really show a few examples where some of the findings from our studies, for example, saying that, at the identification stage, inclusion errors was not really a problem, and we did a lot of back checks, etc. But there was scope to reduce exclusion errors, to going all the way to when the pandemic hit us doing these rapid, telephonic surveys to understand what was happening to these poorest of poor, and basis that how the government was able to, issue more information on COVID-19, were able to direct more relief efforts towards these households. So I would just like to end by saying that, evidence from randomized evaluations is really, really important to get us to identify what is it that we need to do. But if we really want to go all the way to ensure that the governments have the right playbook on how to do it, but when the implementation is happening, good evaluation systems can really help. And we are right now also working on government's own MIS data that they are continuing to collect, how to make that more usable, how to make, working with them to ensure that there are right dashboards that are like really coming up with actionable insights. So I'll end here and pass it back to you, Sara.
Thank you very much, Shagun. That was incredibly rich in very few minutes. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I really agree with this principle of using the program sort of monitoring management data to both manage it and make decisions in real time and learn how to adjust. And so I really hope we can learn a bit more and unpack that with you further. For now, I will pass it on to Andrew, who will be sharing his experience in really monitoring COVID-19 impacts on poverty, which is something that's on all our minds, and tell us a bit how this can inform program implementation. Thank you, Andrew.
Hello, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, not yet.
No. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to talk very briefly about something we've set up called the COVID Poverty Monitoring Initiative. And this was set up more or less from the beginning of the pandemic, although it took quite a long time to get it funded and going. But we wanted to know, we thought that many of the responses to the pandemic were not being designed with poor people in mind. And we wanted to know what the impacts of the pandemic and the policy responses to the pandemic were for the poorest people and those at risk of impoverishment. And we wanted then to ask the question, what sort of responses would be appropriate in relation to the knowledge that we acquired. And we wanted to do this in a way that was quite rapid and could give policymakers and program designers rapid feedback. What we've done is to produce a number of national bulletins based on qualitative work largely, but also linked in with household surveys where those are available. So what we've done in terms of research is to revisit life history interviewees that we had already done life history work with pre-COVID, and to revisit them during COVID and see what they could tell us about their experiences. And we plan to do repeated interviews, allowing the development of a picture over time. Also this would allow in-depth follow-up on particular issues which emerged as important. We were able to do interviews relatively quickly, and then to produce a bulletin, not a very heavily analyzed. These are not academic or research outputs, they're very much monitoring outputs. We produced a bulletin very quickly after the interviews. In many cases, what we found corroborated the results of rapid phone surveys, but we felt that we were able to explore the reasons for these results rather more in depth. And we were also able to explore some issues such as coping strategies, which the phone surveys were not really getting at very much. And I'll just illustrate these and then talk a little bit about the policy implications. So two things which the phone surveys have repeatedly found. One is that people have been experiencing expenditure increases, the cost of living has gone up, and the other is that they have lost livelihoods, either in terms of hours of work or in terms of actual livelihoods being closed down, or reduced hours of work, and so on. And this is a kind of scissors effect. One of the interesting things that we've found here, and a scissors effect which can lead to significant impoverishment. And I suppose our hypothesis, having seen the advent of the pandemic and the policy responses to the pandemic, was that we were going to witness a lot of impoverishment. And as we all know, that's been borne out in practice. So we wanted to understand more about how this was happening. One of the interesting things that we've been finding is that many of the poorest people, of course, depend on wage labor and casual wage labor. And there has been a great variety in the extent to which employers have stopped or slowed down employing people. So in some cases, the impact was very rapid. For example, in Kenya at the beginning of the pandemic. And in other cases, it has taken almost a year before employers have started to slow down employing people. So in terms of the coping strategies that we've found, people have been selling assets in some cases. People have been taking loans in order to maintain basic consumption needs. And something that we found quite commonly is that the social networks that people have depended on have gone into decline during the pandemic. So they are no longer poor people are no longer able to depend on their social networks, close family and further family and friendships and neighbors and so on, as they used to do. There was one exception to that, which is in Ethiopia, where wealthier people have been organized by the state to bring assistance to poorer people in terms of food or cash, depending on local circumstances. But otherwise, social networks seem to have deteriorated quite strongly. And in this context, we've found that the level of support provided by social protection programs, even with the expansion that has happened in many countries during the pandemic, has been inadequate to support households to cope with the economic disruptions that they've experienced. So, some real-time policy implications that we can draw from this. Relief is inadequate, and this is a year in now. Who knows how long the pandemic will last? Clearly, it's going to come and go and last quite a bit longer. So I think adjusting the relief responses, the social protection responses, as we go along is quite a priority. And then people's resilience is, of course, very important, and it's very clear that resilience has been, in some cases, resilience was already in decline prior to the pandemic, but certainly in most cases, the pandemic is undermining people's resilience. And in 2021, in 2020, people have perhaps sold assets, they have depleted their savings in order to consume. In 2021, there's not much left. So I think that's perhaps an important point that we can make. And we draw attention to a number of things that relief funds.
Sorry, I just want to add the warning slide, the whistle, if you can go to your concluding slide quickly.
Okay, I think this is the final one. So we've just drawn attention to a few things there that relief funds could support. And a lot of countries are now taking very big loans. And perhaps some of those loans could be directed to some of these issues. So just in terms of what we feel we can contribute from this experience, we can provide insights into the adequacy of certain programs as part of an economic inclusion package. We can look at implementation bottlenecks where access to certain services is not happening for particular reasons, and this can be quite well discovered through qualitative research. And we can also make suggestions as to how the economic inclusion programs can address these kind of constraints. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I really look forward to drilling down on all of you with a couple more questions right now. Before I do that, I have one Menti poll for the audience, which I will read right now. So please log into your Mentis. And the question, I think will be shown on the screen, is what is most important to set up as part in order to have a strong monitoring systems and to monitor and improve program performance. And please select any of these two statements. So defining appropriate results indicator, data collection, training human resources, setting up a strong MIS, and active monitoring. So what is the most pressing issue? The two most pressing issues. It seemed like designing strong performance and result indicators is the winning one. And active monitoring. I will give my interpretation of what active monitoring is, and I will actually ask a little bit about this in the questions, and really have dashboards that can help you unpack the management indicators and really look at the data on a routine basis to try and ask yourself questions around what is working in the program and what's not, I think is really important. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think there are two clear winners of this slide. I will go back to questions, and I will start with Shagun, if I may. So you mentioned a lot about the importance of course correcting, like working with programs, really looking at what's happening in the field. But when programs start, especially when they're trying to scale up, they can very easily be overwhelmed by the number of things that have to happen. They have coverage targets to meet and implementation challenges left and right. And so really trying to reach everything at once can feel like it's too hard or impossible to achieve. And sometimes you lose focus on what can be changed quickly and what would be really key in your results change, because it really would lead to a better outcome in the end. So JPAL works as a technical and knowledge partner with governments and state governments. And how do you ensure that real-time learning, and there was a question in the chat and really about how real-time, how fast is this real-time information that's coming up, really can be used to course correct, to focus on the most important things and do it quickly. I'm sure it's been challenging, but can you tell us a bit more?
Sure. Thanks, Sara. That's a great question. And there was also one more question in the chat. So I'll try to take all of these together. They're kind of related. So I think, again, I think for us, we've been extremely fortunate because there are a few features of this partnership that has really enabled us to not just collect this data, analyze it, and come up with important insights, but also for it to flow to the right people and for there to be a lot of openness to receiving this, right? And so I would say that the first thing that's really important to keep in mind is that when you are thinking about the design of the program itself, and even though this is a graduation approach, we know the different features, but now when it has to be adapted so that it becomes even more scalable and it can really reach so many people in this state, you have to start thinking about monitoring and evaluation at the same time. Secondly, I really believe that triangulation is really, really important here. And so it's not just that we as an organization that's collecting data and that's the only data, right? So for us, a lot has to do also with the fact that the CEO of this initiative on the government side was very keen that while they will invest in their own MIS systems, they did want JPAL to be collecting this ongoing data directly from the beneficiaries that can really it's not really about a check on the data they're themselves collecting, but as a sort of complement to it. So one of the big things is that, and when I showed the picture of a dashboard, that is not our data. The data is that's being collected through the MIS, which is being, and someone asked this question, yes, it is on the phone apps of these frontline workers. And many times we know that, you can't always rely because the person filling the data is the person also implementing those activities on the ground. But even there, when you have all of this data, one of the things that we've managed to do is that how do we then support this data unit to come up or like even visualize data in ways or to kind of analyze data in ways that it immediately is a lot more insightful. And I would say that in India, we've been very fortunate because the government had already set up a big system of, for example, having, these direct benefit transfers, having bank accounts. So all of that hardware was in place. Which allowed for a program like graduation approach. So the asset transfer, all of that is pretty seamless. But it is the coaching and mentoring part. It's these other aspects of the program that really need close attention. So one is to work with government's own data, help them, and we are not collecting this MIS, but helping them use the power of it in a big way. Second is to have these feedback loops. So again, we are talking both with the program team and the head on a very regular basis. So you have to have these meetings, you have to send these reports, you have to make these presentations, you have to bring everyone together. That's really important. And third is the fact that you already know, even when you begin, and from the work that's been happening in these other countries with the graduation approach, that where are the weak points. So we know that families do tend to drop off. We know that mentoring and coaching is often very hard to do. So we are also going and doing these surveys with the frontline workers themselves to understand what are their challenges, right? And even so, it's not just about the beneficiary, but even the challenges of these frontline workers themselves. For example, they find it really hard to teach book of records, to teach how to do simple maths to these beneficiaries, right? Which is a very important part when you have an enterprise or when you have a livestock. So those are some of the things. Anyway, I can keep rambling on, but I am also conscious of time. So I will end here and hand it back to you.
Thank you very much. We can have a follow-up coffee conversation around this, because I'd be really fascinated to hear more. But I want to go back now to a little bit to what I was asking Kelsey after her presentation, and sort of a little bit at this, kind of at the, maybe at the starting point, or when you're, but not only, because as Shagun mentioned, you have these feedback, you should have these feedback loops. And so you really need to bring stakeholders together, probably multiple times during, even during implementation, but for sure when you're starting off and you're trying to make the case for a program. And so I wanted to really ask you and to discuss a little bit some of the different tools that you used and how you use them. And you mentioned in your presentation really the importance of hearing directly from beneficiaries and having that information feed into the conversation. But can you tell us how you use these different analytical tools to identify issue and reach agreements on appropriate program design and delivery?
Sure. I think a little bit within the theme of the workshop, that the tools that you use also need to be multifaceted, and you can't go into the design of a program with a preconceived notion of what you want to do. You really need to let the evidence that you collect and the evidence from other programs speak to the design of the program. And so for people that know me, this is going to be funny, but I would really give, so I feel like around the world, we have an armory of people that can do the quantitative research, that can do the quantitative side of JPAL and IPA have done a great job of. We can do those quantitative surveys and we can do them well, and we have tools to share. In terms of the qualitative side, where I think that we get a lot of value from this community of practice that we work in, we're less aware of how to use it and the type of people that can do it. And so the qualitative research, I think, was very, like, I went in saying, okay, I think that if we have all this quantitative research and we show it to the government, they're going to, okay, well, that's what that said. But really the qualitative research and the anecdotes and the color that we were able to provide ended up being very important as well. I don't see that that's true in all contexts, but having a variety of tools, including literature reviews, reports, data simulations, this quantitative approach to household surveys, as well as qualitative research, was all super helpful. In terms of actually building the consensus, I think it's an answer that we all know, but it's hard to do. That it requires time, it requires trust, it requires fostering relationships with people at low and high levels. And then it requires getting people to know each other over time to build a program that works. And I don't think that there's a simple answer to how to build that type of trust. It takes time and it takes effort, and it takes a sensitivity as well as a humbleness in the face of what the data brings and what other people's ideas are.
Thank you. Yes, I think we've all experienced that, and really having solid evidence is a good way to start a discussion. I like the idea of having multifaceted tools. Sometimes we're so rushed that it's hard to plan it out like that, but always the success stories that you hear had a significant investment upfront on doing this, right? So I think it is a sort of a call for all of us to take that time and really, you can start quickly, that things will be perfect, and as long as you have the mechanisms to find out fast and get evidence to change things, I think it's okay. Andrew, I would be interested in hearing from you. I found your presentation very interesting and really how to go further. Even it wasn't just about hearing from beneficiaries, it was really digging into some of the constraints they face, their coping strategies. But I in partly because I rushed you, I sort of cut you off on the part that was very interesting to me, which is how do we bring that up and use it to shift to, I don't know, maybe high level policies. You had a lot of high level messages there in terms of ensuring even fiscal resources to provide sufficient support, but then also at the program level, how can that be used to inform design and course correct?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think at the program level, it's perhaps an easier question to answer because I think having quite frequent real-time in-depth data is very advantageous. And in what we're doing, we can adjust from one wave of interviews to the next wave of interviews, you know, the topics that we are discussing. So if there's an emerging issue, we can reflect on that. And I think having, you know, the very quick turnaround is tremendously advantageous in situations which are quickly changing. So the pandemic is an obvious example, but there would be many others. And particularly now with climate, the way that climate extremes are affecting so many situations, that would be the case. In terms of engagement with policymakers and getting policymakers to change or getting new policies or adaptations to policies, I think what Kelsey was saying is pretty accurate. You know, you need to carry people with you from the beginning. You need to establish a community of interest around what you're doing. And I mean, in our case, we're working across 9 countries at the moment on this initiative. So we're working a lot with local partners in each country, and how the policy engagement is done really depends on the traditions and abilities and capacities of those local partners. And it's different things in different places. So some partners have very good high-level government audiences, and that if they put on a seminar or a webinar or something, they will get good attendance and they will be able to have a good dialogue. For others, it's much more difficult. And of course, the governance context varies hugely as to how receptive governments are to external messages which they have not commissioned, you know, having an impact. I mean, I do think that combining the quantitative and the qualitative is the ideal, because with the quantitative evidence, you can impress people in the Ministry of Finance, and with the qualitative evidence, you can impress people elsewhere and people perhaps outside government. So I think there are different audiences which can come together. So if you want to create a consensus, having both is definitely an advantage, I think. Another thing that I would say is, I think you raised the issue of active monitoring, and probably we have lots of different interpretations of active monitoring, but I do think that if you don't try and set up a really big system, I mean, maybe really big systems are useful. I'm not saying that they're not useful, but in the meantime, in between your big system surveys and so on, if you can bite off some small chunks, and this is where qualitative work really comes in, small chunks which can be relatively easily analyzed and then relatively easily discussed, rather than doing the whole job at once. And if you can do small chunks sequentially over time and build up your community of interest over time, that might be an alternative to the more classic monitoring approaches.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that's very interesting. My experience has been that one of the bigger challenges is really generating these feedback loop mechanisms, really making sure that you have the information, but then it leads to decisions. And so, to what Shagun was mentioning, the importance of creating a unit that has capacity to really look at the data and analyze it and draw lessons from it in a relatively short amount of time and pass it on to the decision makers in a way that they can decide. this has been, in my experience, one of the more challenging parts, right? And we work and dashboards help a lot. Just the work that goes behind getting, dashboard design and understanding which indicators to follow and what is really program management, I think speaks a lot. It's not the qualitative side, but it's this idea of really building on the essential infrastructure of the program. Someone in the chat said really to work on the workflow of the program to draw from that information, and that's useful, right? I agree with this very much. And it's really about how, precisely because we cannot in every case set up these massive evaluation mechanisms, or we don't have the luxury to wait for them to provide results, or things are changing too quickly. And so we have to start, but starting somewhere is challenging. Can I ask each one of you to reflect, maybe 1 minute each, reflect a little bit on this aspect, and how do we sometimes underutilize this data that's regular program management data, and what would your suggestions be, 1 or 2, to really improve the quality, the timeliness of regular program monitoring data, and so that those lessons can be extracted, and then they can be translated into action. And maybe we can start with Kelsey, and then Shagun and Andrew.
Sure. So I work generally on the RCT side, but I am an alumni of IPA. So I would put a plug for Dean Carlin's book on collecting data in terms of don't collect data that you're not going to use, and don't collect data. So 1, it annoys people, and 2, it sort of will not let you see the forest for the trees. So my naive approach is to find the indicators that you care about and focus on those, and to sort of let the extra things go away. And you can change the indicators that you care about over time, but to not really focus on collecting too much data, but rather to focus on high quality, the data that you have. And also a plug for administrative systems and building out existing administrative data. I think the future is to not do household surveys, but rather to collect administrative data either through governments themselves or through things like cell phone data, or things like satellite data, including crop cuts, or the things that can do remote sensing. And in this way, we don't have to spend so much energy doing household surveys, collecting so many data points that we end up not utilizing. So I think having a good plan to start with and to focus only on certain indicators in the monitoring process is super valuable. And yes, a plug for the Dean's book on collecting good quality data that you can use.
Yeah, Sarah, I'm happy to go next. So I think what I would say is that, again, I think that there is a lot of power in demonstration. So I think for a lot of these, especially in the government systems, like I said, it's almost become a checkbox to have funding for these, systems, which MIS or program systems. You get an IT vendor in place, they do all of this work. And then a lot of these frontline workers are also using this app to fill out data, although now with technology, they are also taking pictures, showing their GPS pin, which is more coming from this, accountability sense that were you actually there at the household to do this mentoring. But I think in our experience, it's really, kind of showing to them first the power that this data can really have. So something as simple as, like I was saying, that when they analyze the data, they just say by district, okay, what has been the distribution of MRPs visiting, different sort of districts, but then there are different ways of slicing the data and playing around with it. And then suddenly they're able to see that, yes, it can actually make a difference to how I was thinking about it, right? Or where I was going to deploy more resources. So what I would like to say here is that, one, I think many times we also focus too much on the highest person. And of course, they are the champions. They're really like kind of driving the whole thing. But it's equally important to really interact with people at different levels, the state teams or the district heads, and kind of, work with them. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second thing I wanted to say was, especially with this idea of feedback loops, I think it's also really important, and someone's also mentioned it in the chat, that we don't want to burden the frontline health workers. We don't want the data to become something that they have to do as a checkbox. So I think it's equally important that we be parsimonious. And initially when we started, we also did a lot of trainings when they were actually setting up this MIS system to say, okay, let's not collect so much data. Will this be of use or not? But then, like, as we go forward in these feedback loops, like I'm saying, also bringing data from different sources that we have done. And finally, I would like to say that it's really important. Like, we also have an RCT, of course. At the end of the day, we also are interested in seeing, you know, what was the impact. But it's not just about the baseline and endline. It's really about what's happening in the middle. And here we think there is a lot of opportunity to really do a lot more. And I call this process evaluation. This is not even monitoring. You're actually evaluating each aspect of the program as it's being implemented, right? So I would say that, and many times with RCTs, we want it to be, you know, we want the implementation to not have many changes to it, right? But when you're doing that of a scale up, I think it's perfectly fine to keep tweaking the model, to keep having that adaptations, because this is your real, like, this is like an efficacy. It's not just like this trial that you're doing to see whether the program works. We know the program works, but in the shape and form where government implements it at that scale, what is the impact, right? So we are okay for these kind of things to happen, for these threats to happen, as long as they don't, you know, the internal validity remains intact. But yeah, those are some thoughts from my side.
I don't have much to add, but if you have good administrative data in your program, then I think bringing it to life with a small amount of good in-depth qualitative data can make a lot of difference to the quality of discussions about the decisions that program managers have to make. So, you know, bring in some external experts, preferably, who can work with focus group discussions and sentinel household interviews, or interviews with individuals, with beneficiaries, with people who are not benefiting, just to illuminate the administrative data that your program is collecting along the way. But I would want to comment on Kelsey's wish to move from household surveys to cell phone data and satellite data and so on. I mean, I think that you can do a lot with cell phone generated data and satellite generated data. But if you want to disaggregate, and particularly if you want to include the bottom parts of the income distribution in your understanding of what is going on, I think household surveys are absolutely essential. And not that you have to be doing them all the time, but at least periodically, and well designed and linked from one to the other over time, preferably. Household surveys can do a very useful job. So I wouldn't want to move too quickly in the direction that you are advocating. Thank you.
So thank you very much to all of you. This has been a very interesting discussion for me. I've learned a lot, as has been the case over the past three days of conversations. I hope we'll have other opportunities to ask more questions. But for now, I just wanted to maybe take 1 minute to mention 3 takeaway points that I have. And to do that, I want to go back first to something that was said the first day during the opening by Ben Davis, which is really that I think the encouragement that we all share here in this session, at least, to really think of evidence generation for this stage of economic inclusion programs as something that has to happen as part of implementation for it to be useful for policymakers, and that it shouldn't be something that's self-standing. I think the session today has really demonstrated that. Not only is it desirable, it's possible, and there are ways to do it effectively. It's rewarding to do it. And I really share this sort of desire to really maximize the use of our regularly collected data and find new ways to enrich it. And so from my perspective, I guess the 3 takeaway messages, the first one is to really focus on data that is collected regularly on few data, not develop these very big systems necessarily from the start, but make sure you're critically, you know what data you want to focus on. And then you do your best to collect it regularly. The second point is that you diversify these data sources, right? So you maybe look for ways to enrich and bring to life the data that comes from process evaluation, regular program monitoring, and that's collected regularly through qualitative work, really listening and hearing the beneficiaries, and not just the beneficiaries, but also the program staff and those responsible for implementing the program. And then as a final point, something that's really important is really build the capacity within the program, all levels, to really analyze that data and maximize, extract the value, show its demonstration effect that can really also help, generate greater consensus for, and I think also desire to make the right improvements in the program. If more people involved in it can look at this data, use it, and see how valuable it is. And that really requires capacity building, right? It's interesting that there's so much, I agree with the fact that we're spending a lot of money and it's sort of default to think about the MIS, but it's not the case everywhere. And even where it is, I think there tends to be an unbalance between, investing in the app and really investing in the capacity of the staff to analyze the data that they collect. So I think this is really a call for more of that in the future. But having said that, I know that we're really over time. So I want to thank everyone for your patience. And you will now see a survey appear on your screen. It will take you just a moment to please let us know if you enjoyed the session, how useful this was. It's an anonymous poll. We won't know what to say, and the results will not be displayed, but it really is our own personal way to do some real-time learning and inform the design of the next events. So please do take a moment to do that. We really appreciate it. And the two questions is, how would you rate this session? From 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. And the second question is, I will use material and ideas from this session for my future work in this area. And again, you'll have a series of options from strongly disagree to agree. Thank you again to everyone. I think you'll find, especially to our speakers, but to all participants for joining and engaging. And you can find the links to the next session in the chat box. Thanks again.